Welcome to Protege, where we break down the invisible skills that actually accelerate your career. I'm Molly Jaggers. For the past few weeks, we've been peeling back the forces that actually shape who gets promoted: time, confidence, sponsorship. And today I want to talk about how all this comes together. And this one matters the most because it's where the story stops being about what's broken and starts being about what you actually have to work with. Now, we all know the world of work changed 6 years ago. Distributed, hybrid, remote, pick your word. We all lived it, and we all adjusted. And now there's a second shift happening on top of the first. The org chart is flattening. AI is absorbing the information routing work that middle management used to do. The hierarchy that determined whose work got seen and who got tapped for what, it's being rebuilt in real time. And most people don't know what to do with that yet. But almost nobody has updated the one thing that actually determines whether you get promoted: the way your work gets seen. The old ways of being noticed didn't get replaced, they just disappeared. And most of us kept reaching for them anyways. Catching someone in the hallway, the post meeting coffee that turned into a sponsor relationship, the shoulder tap for a stretch project because you happened to be standing there when the conversation happened. That whole system evaporated. And in its place is something almost nobody is using yet. The old system also had a design, and it wasn't neutral. It was built on proximity, and it favored certain people. What we have now is messier, less legible, but it's also, for the first time, not structurally stacked against you. That's new. And here's the thing about a forced shift: you adapt to survive, and usually you stop there. Nobody hands you a manual for how to use this moment differently. And that's what I want to do today. First, here's a little data that made this episode unavoidable. Remote women get promoted at half the rate of remote men. Same companies, same roles, same performance. That looks like a remote work problem. It isn't. Break down the data by location and you actually see it more clearly. On-site women and on-site men get promoted at basically the same rate, 53 versus 54%. So the gap's only opening up at a distance. Now, that's not to say that in-person is equal. The broken rung is still real, where only 81 women get promoted for every 100 men at those first transitions into leadership. But remote work added something on top of it: a visibility tax. And that layer is fixable, because when managers can see your work clearly, that penalty disappears. Not partially, completely. The gap was 100% perception. It was never about where you sat. It was about whose work got seen. Researchers call this proximity bias, the assumption that the person in the room is more committed, more capable, and more promotable, even when the work says otherwise. That's this visibility paradox happening here. Distributed work didn't create a visibility problem for women, it exposed one that was already there. And in the same move, it handed us new stages and new tools, and with them, an entirely new way to be seen. A 2026 HiBob survey of 2,000 professionals independently named that same dynamic, and also found that women received 22% less actionable feedback than men. Feedback requires someone paying attention, and that gap tells you exactly how much attention is missing. And the leadership numbers show exactly where that adds up, too. Grant Thornton's report this year, literally titled "The Value of Visibility," shows that women's share of senior leadership dropped for the third straight year: 35%, then 34, now 31. 1 in 4 companies cut remote options this year, and 1 in 6 killed their sponsorship programs entirely. So the system is pulling back, which means building your own visibility isn't an advantage anymore. It's the only move left. Now, I didn't figure this out in advance. I worked through it by living it. Different roles, different environments, and watching what actually moved the needle. But the pattern is clear to me now, and I want to show it to you. Early in my career, I had a job where I was in every room that mattered. Every strategy meeting, I was there contributing. Every cross-functional workshop, I was the one synthesizing, connecting the product roadmap to the business case, translating the work into something that could travel up. My manager knew my name, Senior leaders knew my name. I got strong performance reviews. On paper, I was exactly where you'd want to be. But when the decisions got announced, when the new initiative was presented in the all hands, or when the strategy deck went up to leadership, the work looked like someone else's. Not because anyone was stealing credit, just because that's how the system worked. Ideas generated in rooms got attributed to the highest ranking person in the room. I was present, I just wasn't visible. And here's what's hard about this version of the story: it didn't even register as a problem. I was in the building, I was getting positive feedback, I thought I was building equity. But what I didn't understand yet was that leadership saw me as my current role, not as someone ready for what came next. Being there wasn't the same as being seen. And I want to name the other version of this because I've been there too. Maybe your work isn't invisible, maybe it's too visible. You get praised constantly for being exactly as good as you are right now. Every review is glowing. Everyone says you're a rock star. And somehow, that's exactly why you can't move, because you're too valuable where you are right now. So feedback like, she's amazing at this, quietly becomes, we can't imagine her doing anything else. The compliment is the cage. Different mechanism, but the same outcome. Your growth is invisible even when your work isn't. So if it's not about location, if it's about perception, then the question isn't, how do I get back to the office? It's, how do I make sure the right people actually see my work? And the answer itself is better than anything that just being in the room could offer. So let's get specific about this. The old model of visibility was all about where you sat. You had to be in the right building, the right room, the right relationships. And even then, whether the right people noticed was largely out of your control. The new visibility is intentional. You build it. And I want to be clear about something. This isn't a remote work hacks episode. Whether you're hybrid, fully remote, or in an office 5 days a week, the workforce is more distributed than it's ever been. Cross functional teams span time zones. Decisions happen in Slack threads and shared docs. The people who control your next opportunity might never even walk past your desk. And that's true even if you have a desk. So, no, this is not about remote work. It's about visibility. And that means it's for everyone in this conversation, whatever your setup looks like. And I want to be honest with you, none of what I'm about to share requires a massive overhaul. These are targeted, specific moves, 4 of them. And every one is a change you can make right now. And here's why this matters more than it did even 2 years ago. The org chart is changing before our eyes. Companies are explicitly redesigning around AI replacing middle management as this information routing layer. And what that means practically is that there are fewer layers between your work and the people who make decisions about your career. More direct exposure, but also less infrastructure catching you. The managers whose job it was to carry your work upstairs are going away, which means you need to be the one making sure it travels. Now, that's not a warning, it's an opening. Because for the first time, the path between your work and the decision makers is shorter and less gate-kept than it's ever been. So the question is whether you're building visibility that takes advantage of that or waiting for a system that's being quietly dismantled to notice you. The women who move up aren't working more. They're working on the right things in front of the right people at the right time. There's a difference between being indispensable and being invisible. And what I've learned is that the difference comes down to one thing: being intentional about the narrative your work builds. When work lives through different channels, Slack, shared docs, virtual meetings inside your company, and LinkedIn and other communities externally, it demands that you get clear about what you're doing, tie it to business outcomes, make sure the right people have a path to find it, and that when they do, it's unmistakably yours. And that the people who advocate for you have what they need to sell your story when you're not in the room. And before we get into the 4 moves, I have one more thing to mention. Now, these tactics work. I've lived them, and the research also backs them. But I also want to be honest. They are working inside a system that's still imperfect. Lean In's 2025 data shows that remote women still access sponsorship at 37% versus 52% for remote men, even when they're doing everything right. The structural gap doesn't disappear just because you show up right, but the data also shows that intentional visibility is one of the few levers you can actually pull. So that's what we're going to focus on. Now, the first one of these I call the async paper trail, and most people are completely undervaluing this. Think about this. In an office, your work disappears the moment the meeting ends. Someone said something smart? Gone. You synthesized a complex problem in real time? Nobody wrote that down. But in distributed settings, written output with clear attribution is a visibility engine. The person who writes the post meeting recap controls the narrative and gets their name on every idea in it. Every Slack thread where you synthesize a complex problem, that's a searchable record of your judgment. Every document where you name the insight, that's findable. And every async update where you connect your work to a business outcome, that's shareable. Now, companies like Atlassian built this into how they work. Every meeting starts with a shared doc, creating a permanent, searchable record of who contributed what. Your writing becomes a portfolio that works for you 24/7. Doesn't need you in the room, it doesn't need you online. It's just there, doing the visibility work that hallway conversations never could. The women who are winning distributed work have figured something out. Async environments reward the people who can think in writing, document deliberately, and be visible in the channels where decisions actually happen. If you can do that, and you have an advantage the old office model never gave you. Here's what this looks like in practice. Before, you'd mention your win in a one on one with your manager and hope it travels up. But now, you write a monthly impact summary with 3 sentences: what you did, what it was worth, what it connects to strategically, and you share it async with your skip level. That documentation travels further than any hallway conversation ever could. And I want to tell you how I actually learned this because I didn't walk in knowing it. Years ago, I took a job at a growth stage startup as their first product marketing manager. The mandate was genuinely exciting: take a legacy failing product, redesign it, relaunch it. And on top of that, my SVP brought me in to build the product marketing discipline from scratch: the frameworks, the operating model, the whole structure for how marketing and product would work together. None of it really existed yet, and it was a big challenge. And I was proving myself to people I'd never met in person, halfway across the country. I couldn't walk into my SVP's office to run an idea by him. I couldn't run into the CTO in the hallway and get a read on where things stood. Every relationship had to start on a video call and earn its way forward through the quality of what I was delivering. And what that forced me to do, that I genuinely don't think I could have learned any other way, was think much harder and more critically about the work itself. What's the narrative here? How do I build a business case that lands for an executive who's only going to see me on a screen? How do you show executive presence through a camera? How do you influence a room you're not physically in? And it made me a better marketer and a better product thinker because I had to learn to speak both languages through a screen. And it also taught me that if you're intentional enough about how your work travels, not just what you're producing, but the story you're building around it, it creates advocacy in rooms you never set foot in. I was actually in that market last week and had dinner with my former SVP because he's become one of my closest friends and mentors. And he said something that stayed with me. He mentioned that he hired me on a gut feeling. And I believe that because we just clicked so well during the interview process. But gut feeling is what got me the job. My work is what earned the advocacy. He championed me from halfway across the country. So did the CTO. Neither of them needed to see me in the building to believe in what I was building. The work was in front of them every week, and I had connected the dots between impact and value. Those two people are two of the most important mentors of my entire career. And the trust, the advocacy, the foundation of those relationships, all of it was built before I ever worked with them in the same city. By the time I eventually did, the bond was already there. Proximity didn't create it, the work did. Now, going on to the second move, I call this one the attribution architecture. And it starts with a shift that most people haven't fully registered yet. Think about this. One thing you have to realize is that the math of visibility has flipped. In an office, your reach was passive, maybe 20 people, limited to whoever happened to be on your floor or in your department or whoever you happen to ride up the elevator with that day. But in a distributed company, you can reach hundreds intentionally. A single message in a company wide channel reaches every executive simultaneously. One sharp question in a virtual all hands, and suddenly the CTO knows who you are. That inversion of access has happened to everyone. Most people are just not using it. Attribution architecture is how you leverage this change and make it work for you. And this isn't theoretical. Sylvia Ann Hewlett wrote Executive Presence 2.0, and she explicitly names virtual leadership mastery and social media command as promotion criteria. Not nice to have, criteria. The platforms where your industry actually lives, LinkedIn, industry Slacks, communities, virtual events, they crossed a critical mass when work went distributed. That's not a coincidence. It's a new visibility surface that didn't exist a decade ago. Here's the stat I keep coming back to. 61% of executives now rate personal brand above resumes when evaluating candidates. So your digital presence isn't a side project, it's career infrastructure. So the question isn't whether to show up in these channels, it's how to show up. Because there's a version of this that builds real visibility and a version that disappears into the noise. There's a few layers to what separates them too. It starts with a point of view. The content that builds credibility isn't, oh, great article or interesting read. It's, here's what I think is missing from how our industry approaches this, and here's what I'd do instead. Executives aren't scrolling just because they're bored, they're looking for signals. A named, specific perspective is signal. Enthusiasm without a thesis is just noise. And also, consistency beats volume. One or two posts a week with actual substance outperforms daily posting because what executives actually remember isn't frequency, it's engagement depth. The post they commented on, bookmarked, or forwarded to someone, that's what gets you found. And the other piece is lead with the problem your audience is trying to name. Not, here's my take. More like, here's the thing you've been struggling to articulate, and here's what I think about it. People don't share content just because it was smart. They share it because it said something they'd been trying to say. And the last piece is that internal and external visibility are not the same thing, and you need both. LinkedIn builds credibility with decision makers who don't work with you yet. Internal channels, Slack threads, decision memos, project summaries, those build attribution inside your organization. Different surfaces, different audiences, but the same habit. Something like a Slack synthesis that you post in your company names you as the person who saw the pattern. Your LinkedIn post names you to people you've never met. Both together are what attribution architecture actually looks like. So before you announce some kind of win without context, I'm excited to share this launch. But after, you write 3 sentences: what you learned, what you do differently, what it means for the problem you were solving, in your name, first person, and connect it to a real business outcome. You're not announcing at this point. You're building a record of how you think. And here's the thing about all of this that I don't want you to miss. The people who go to bat for you in rooms you're not in, your sponsors, your allies, the people who say, you need to talk to her, they need something concrete to carry. Every piece of attributed work you put into the world is a brief for someone who might need to sell your name without you there to explain yourself. You're not just building visibility, you're building the case file. Now, if attribution architecture is reach, where you write something once and a lot of people can find it, cross-functional exposure is the depth. This is where a few decision makers might watch your judgment play out over weeks and then months, and one gets you noticed, but the other gets you backed. Distributed companies run on cross-functional projects. And here's the key. These projects are often open call, not just invite only. In an office, a lot of stretch assignments where you could build experience capital went to whoever happened to be near the manager when the opportunity came up, or who had already been established as their go to person. Where you sat became the mechanism for getting selected, whether anyone admitted it or not. In distributed settings, though, the opportunity is much more likely to surface in an open channel. You can raise your hand, and you're evaluated on your contribution, not on whether you were passing the right person in the right hallway at the right time. Not every project is worth the bandwidth, though. The ones that build sponsorship share three things. Your name is on the output, not just the team's. The work is tied to a business outcome a senior leader actually cares about, and you have multiple touch points over weeks, not a single deliverable that just disappears into thin air once it ships. And a quick side note on what your name on the output actually means in practice. When you share results from that work, use first person. I found, I ran the analysis, my team's data showed. Group credit sounds humble, but it erases you. And if you don't name yourself, nobody else will. This is also how you build sponsor relationships without relying on the traditional channels. The old way of gaining this visibility and trust depended on luck. Grab coffee in the break room, hope for an organic connection with a senior leader. But now you contribute visibly to a cross functional project, then send a follow up with your perspective to the executive sponsor of that project. Look at what that unlocks. Now, that executive sponsor starts following your work, not through a 30-minute coffee, but across a body of work over weeks. And then they recommend you for an opportunity you never would have heard about. A 2024 Harvard Business Review piece by Rachel Simmons makes this explicit. The strategies for building a sponsor relationship are, and this is a quote, especially important for pairings where the bond is built mainly through virtual interactions. The relationship is different, but it's not weaker because it's built on the demonstrated competence instead of small talk. And there's one more move inside this tactic that most women skip. Don't just do the work and hope it surfaces. Brief your advocates. When you're working with someone who has the ear of decision makers, send them a note. Hey, here's what I'm working on, and here's what I'd want you to know if my name comes up. You're not asking them to do anything. You're making it easy for them to do what they already want to do, which is go to bat for someone they believe in. They can only champion what they can describe. All right, last one. And I want to be honest with you about why I saved this one for the end. Everything I just walked you through works, but it works a lot better when you've cleared your calendar of non promotable work. Women were promoted at 22% last year compared to 34% for men. And one of those biggest contributors? Career debt. The work that fills your calendar but never shows up in a promotion conversation. Things like organizing virtual meetings, managing team morale, event planning, taking meeting notes. The career debt followed you home when everything went digital. The tools changed, but that tax on your career did not. And this is a different version of the visibility trap than being praised into a box. That one caps your title, but this one takes your time. And both are invisible taxes, but this one you can audit. And we've talked about the 200-hour tax on this show before, but today I want to give you the distributed work lens of it because there's something new here that changes the math. That async paper trail we talked about earlier works both ways. It can make your work visible, your analysis, your synthesis, your strategic thinking, or it can document a pattern of service work that never gets you promoted. Every meeting you organized, every onboarding you ran, that's visible too. And it's telling a story about what you do, just not the one you want. Now, I ran this audit on my own calendar a few years ago. And when I did, I remember thinking my non promotable work ratio would be around like 20%. It was not, it was 40%. And I'd been calling it being a good teammate and being organized. But really, it was a 40% tax on my career because the time it took to do that work was time that I wasn't using my expertise to move the work as a whole forward. And here's what's different now. A lot of that work is automatable. meeting summaries, scheduling coordination, calendar management, note taking. There are AI tools handling all of this today. And what I love about that is that learning to automate the work that's taxing you is in itself a promotable skill. You reduce the tax and you build AI literacy at the same time. So you're not just paying down that career debt, you're turning it into a capability. So before you build visibility, I would just take 15 minutes and audit your own calendar and ask yourself these 4 questions. What am I doing that only I can do that truly shows my expertise? What am I doing because nobody else volunteered? What would happen if I stopped? And what on this list could I automate in the next 30 days? That last question is where the leverage is. Find the tax and then decide drop it, delegate it, or automate it. You have more options than you think. And I want to show you what it looks like when you put all of this together. Because I'm not just teaching this, I'm living it right now. When I launched Protege, I didn't have an office, I didn't have a lot of resources. I had an idea, a vision, and a set of skills I knew I could leverage once I figured out the plan. When I started with the podcast and that launch post went out, I watched it reach people I'd never met that I didn't even know followed me. Different companies, different industries, different cities. There was a seasoned marketing and sales executive who lived halfway across the country, someone who'd built and rebuilt an agency through things most of us can't imagine, who messaged me on LinkedIn to call what I was building a beautiful vision. We'd never even been in a room together. Months later, she's still checking in and we talk as peers. And someone I'd overlapped with years ago at a previous company, paths that only occasionally crossed back then, found my work, reached out, and is now one of the builders that I trade notes with every month. A peer accountability partner I didn't see coming from a chapter of my life I thought had closed. And for every one of those, there were countless others. Women who'd been following me for a while, some from my old life, some I'd never even met, reaching out, curious and supportive of what I was building. People I hadn't heard from in years, people I'd never heard from at all. All of them showing up because the work was finally somewhere they could find it. Even consulting conversations started with people who'd never even been in the same room as me. And something else I didn't expect was the range of people who showed up. Women navigating their first leadership transition, yes. But also mid level leaders who'd built their careers on the old model, watched it disappear, and were trying to figure out what replaces it. And even senior executives who were people who used to develop talent through all of these formal sponsorship programs or office floor time or come sit in on this meeting moments. Who were now trying to figure out how to identify and back the next generation when work doesn't look the same in a physical sense anymore. They're looking for proteges we're sponsoring, and they're finding them through the work. So, new connections across ventures I hadn't even mapped out yet, doors I didn't know existed, opened by the work I published. Even my own mentors, the people who've led at the highest levels, the same ones who championed me when I was proving myself from across the country, they'll listen to an episode or read something I've written and say, damn, you nail this in a way I haven't seen anywhere else. That kind of feedback doesn't come from being in a room. It comes from work that travels. Almost none of these people knew how I operated in a meeting. They knew what I thought because I'd set it into a microphone, written it into a newsletter, or put it somewhere they could find it. And I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you because this is the moment that all of this crystallized for me. I couldn't go back to building my reputation inside 4 walls. Not because I don't value in person connection. I do, I love it. But because the ceiling on what I could build was so much higher without it. Distributed visibility doesn't just replicate what the old model offered, it goes further. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Now, I always knew that Protege was going to be bigger than a podcast. This show is where the community starts, but I have a lot of things I want to build to better serve this mission. But now, all of the other things I'm getting from the visibility, the audience, the conversations, the feedback, it's shaping what it grows into in real time. I'm still building it, but I'm using the visibility in these 4 principles we just walked through to build it right. Now, I know there are two very different people listening to this right now, and what this episode means kind of depends on which one you are. So let me break it down really quickly. If you're one of those executives I just described, who is someone who found this podcast because the old model stopped working, here's what this means for you. The proteges worth backing aren't always the ones in the office. They're the ones whose work shows up consistently in shared channels, whose names appear as driving cross functional deliverables, and whose digital presence demonstrates judgment you can trust. If you're only sponsoring people you can physically see, you're missing the strongest candidate on your team. So start following the work, not the foot traffic. And if you're not yet in a position to sponsor someone, every one of those visibility channels is available to you right now. You don't need permission to use them. You need perspective and judgment. And this is how you sharpen that muscle too. Now, if you're looking to get clear about what to do next, let's put this into action. This week, here's one thing that you can do to start auditing your own visibility. I've got 3 questions for you. First, who are the 5 most senior people who have seen your work in the last 30 days? Not who you've emailed, who has actually seen and interacted with a piece of work that demonstrates your judgment. If you can't name at least 5, that's your gap. Second, what's the last thing you wrote that could be found by someone searching for expertise in your area? Whether that's a Slack synthesis, a project summary, a cross functional contribution, if nothing comes to mind, that's your next move. And third, is there a cross functional project happening right now that you could raise your hand for? Not more work for the sake of more work, but a project that puts your thinking in front of new decision makers. That's it. 3 questions, 10, 15 minutes. You'll know exactly where you stand. Now, if you want the implementation guide, which is the full visibility audit template, specific language for each channel, and a monthly rhythm that keeps this from becoming another thing on your to do list, that's going to be in this week's newsletter. Link is going to be in the show notes. And look, I know visibility can feel like another thing on a list that's already too long. So let me be clear about what I'm not asking you to do. You don't have to do all of this right away. You don't need to go and completely rip apart and rebrand yourself or build a personal website overnight. You don't need to post on LinkedIn every day. You don't need to become an influencer, and you definitely don't just need to go back into the office for FaceTime. You just need to be intentional about where your work shows up and who can find it. And here's what gives me the most hope about all of this. McKinsey found that the so called ambition gap, which is the stat that says women want promotions less than men, disappears entirely when women receive equal sponsorship and advocacy. Entirely. 86% of senior women feel more ambitious than they did 5 years ago. Women aren't opting out of advancement, they're opting out of a system that made them invisible. Intentional visibility is how you opt back in on your own terms. The new visibility model is intentional, and it's more accessible, more equitable, and more powerful than anything the old model ever offered. And when you strip all of it back, the data, the stories, the tactics, it comes down to one thing, and it's easy to miss. The visibility was never in the proximity. It was always in the work. That was always true. You just couldn't see it before. Next week, we're going to turn the lens around, a little less about the system and more about the skills you're building inside it. I'll see you there.